Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another online session with the Lahore Literary Festival. I'd like to thank LLF for having me on board today. And I'll begin by introducing myself. My name is Amna Rizwan Ali, and I'm a lifestyle and culture journalist with an interest in contemporary life and lifestyle. With me today is Turkish writer and a renowned commentator on contemporary Turkish politics, Kaya Genç. You may know him from his first book, Shadow, Rage and Revolution in Modern Turkey, which was highly illuminating. And his most recent book, his nonfiction book, The Lion and the Nightingale, is in the spotlight today. Hi, Kaya. Welcome to LLF.
Hello, Amna. Great to be here.
Yes, and we've met at LLF in Lahore, which was wonderful, and one got to hear your session when you introduced your book to Pakistan. So, tell us where you are right now.
I'm in Antalya. I'm in the Mediterranean part of the country for a little holiday because after a very difficult year and eventful year, I came here uh, and I'm just having a good time before the season begins again. So
So, you think you were saying earlier that there may be the chance of another lockdown in Turkey.
yes, so we are watching the situation every evening, as you do, I'm sure, in every country has their own rituals to announce these numbers. And
Right.
of course, it's worrying. And we seem to be getting to that point where new lockdowns might be necessary. And uh, I spent the lockdown months uh, pondering the meaning of lockdown and the life that lockdowns presented us with.
Mhm.
And I suddenly found myself reading about lockdowns of the previous decades. So it was an interesting time to think about our situation and to historicize it, to see the
Right.
links between the previous generations and how they suffered lockdowns on their own. So it was an interesting time to experience the lockdown and to ponder the lockdown.
So, what did you find out? I mean, historically in Turkey, for example, about any lockdown which was in recent 20th century history?
So, we have a history that is riddled with military coups. And when there's a military coup, people don't like it and people want to react to the coup. And of course, the generals know about this and they impose lockdowns. And I realized that my parents grew up with lockdowns because in the 1980 coup, and before that time as well, the 2 years before the coup, there were curfews in Istanbul. And they got used to these curfews because of all these events on the streets, you know, the leftists and the right wing people attacking each other on the street. And
Mhm.
so every evening after 10 o'clock, a curfew. So they grew up with that curfew. So when these COVID lockdowns arrived, they
Yeah.
were used to these curfews. But for us, it was the first time for my generation. And
Right.
then I realized that there is a certain transmission of historical knowledge between generations, because they have dealt with lockdowns before. They were giving us instructions on what should we stock, what should we buy. And then I noticed that we have this trauma of the military coup, um, particularly the last successful one of the 1980. Uh, and in my book, I chronicle what has happened after the final intended coup in 2016. So that day, parents of my generation were calling frantically and telling my generation what to do. Get money, get some pasta, stock on
Mhm.
water, buy this and that in the course of that night. And then we realized that they know so much about living in lockdowns.
That's
And
right.
then during the current COVID curfews, I realized that this lifestyle might have shaped their character, the way they think, their understanding of freedom and responsibility and danger. And um, then I started reading about their memoirs, what happened during the 1980s curfews. And a great Turkish novelist, Adalet Ağaoğlu, wrote a book called The Curfew. It's all about different people, revolutionaries, conservative people, trying to survive the curfews of the 1970s and early 80s. And it is about how these curfews have shaped that generation. And just as I wrote an essay about this theme in Turkish history, Adalet Ağaoğlu sadly passed. And then I noticed that not many people of my generation have read her books.
Right.
And there is a certain transmission of information between generations through books, and the books are there. And we have to discover them and learn about how previous generations endured these difficult times. So we can make use of our time under lockdown and read about those books, which are in the bookstores, in the libraries, I think,
Have,
rather than obsessing ourselves.
have they been translated in English?
Yes, there's an English translation, an excellent English translation called The Curfew. And so, the crisis always presents us with opportunities, with a kind of a chance to edify ourselves, to read and learn about the previous curfews. So it was an interesting time globally, but also particularly in Turkey because of the military coups, because people in London, in Paris, didn't have those curfew memories. They have traumas that are related with Second World War, the bombings, the Blitz.
That's
And
right.
so I think this time, this global COVID crisis brought us back to our traumas. And for Turkey in particular, it was a trauma of the military coups and their curfews.
Well, you'll be interested to know that I lived through a curfew. I was very young, and it was the late 70s. I must have been 5, 6 years old. And we were with our grandparents in Lahore, and there was a pretty long curfew because of, when Bhutto was deposed and the martial law regime came in. And so I remember that really well as a child. And I saw my grandparents deal with it. For me, my parents were out of the country, and we were with our grandparents. So, now that you've brought it up, it's really interesting that even I lived through a curfew, and I don't know how many Pakistanis have actually sat and pondered on this. It's a great point to think about and try and draw parallels with that time and now, and what we were thinking then about the future and how we are thinking about the future today. So,
Absolutely. I mean, the social media tools that we use, they tend to link us to the present moment, to the anxieties of the present moment, which are, I think, inexplicable if you don't look at history. You cannot understand your position and your anxiety if you don't historicize your position. And
absolutely.
I think it's interesting that Pakistan and Turkey have all these historic similarities. Of course, there are big differences, but then military coups, those the struggle for democracy, the struggle to make secularism work, and to also have a let's say smooth relationship with our religion, with our history.
That's
We are having very similar, I think, struggles. And so I think this crisis brought together two countries even more because of that.
well. You've been to Pakistan twice now and been exposed to a lot of people. So, what was your take on Pakistan and the people that you met?
I mean, I loved Lahore Festival.
Mhm.
First of all, because of the genuine interest of people, rushing to these theaters to see intellectuals, not only from the Muslim world, but also from other parts of the world, to speak eloquently about issues that concern them in Pakistan. And this year, I was lucky enough to be there with Orhan Pamuk, and the wonderful interest in this figure, uh, a novelist, an incredibly accomplished novelist who comes from a Muslim majority country and who has mastered the art of the novel through European masters and also masters of the Asian world. It was wonderful to see fathers and mothers, the way they look at Pamuk. Here is a kind of role model for them, and they believe that our children can be like that successful writer, can be proud of the culture and history of their Muslim majority country, but also be modern and show that these two things can work together. You don't have to be um, against your culture, your history to be modern, and then you don't have to reject modernity to learn about your history. So this kind of examples, and also from intellectuals coming from the US. And I think there is a certain thirst for self-confidence, but an intelligent, thoughtful self-confidence that people in Pakistan were looking for. You can posture and you can raise your voice. That's not self-confidence. That's just bullying. That's not what creates respect and admiration in the audience. But if you see a thoughtful, fragile, vulnerable, intellectual, a Muslim coming from a Muslim majority country, speak so eloquently, either from Turkey, US, or another country, I think there was so much good energy around that kind of role model.
um, Turkey's always had a great pull for the Muslims of the subcontinent, and recently as well, people are fascinated with Turkey. Pakistanis are fascinated with Turkey, and there is a whole sort of new kind of connection recently with Turkey because of the Turkish Disease and the new show that's been widely appreciated in Pakistan, Ertugrul. So that's another realm of sort of appreciation of the culture of Turkey. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I read the Fatima Bhutto essay in Foreign
Yes.
Policy about the Disease phenomenon and the book. And I find it to be a fascinating subject because of these um, wars, ideological wars around the theme of leading the Muslim world. This is a kind of grand theme that she has discussed in her essay, and we are looking at through these TV series. But I find it unsettling, to be honest, when I look at these TV shows. I spent the lockdown months fruitfully watching Game of Thrones. And at the end of Game of Thrones, I don't want to give any spoilers, but we understand the uselessness of power. That throne is an illusion. That throne has to be liquidated and thrown away. But unfortunately, I think shows like Ertugrul have taken opposite view of history, and there's a kind of pompous and nationalistic tone in those TV series. And I'm a historian of Ottoman history myself, but I tell people that you should go to the sources. You should read about the Ottoman poets, the Ottoman historians who wrote about uh, Ertugrul, who wrote about uh, Orhan Bey, Osman Bey, who write about these sultans, because there's a great tradition of Ottoman writers writing epics about these sultans, and
Right.
you can find them in English. Harvard University has a great Turkish language department, and they put out all these excellent translations of these epics. So why watch a Dizzy? I know it's addictive. I know I can see the addiction of it, but
I just
um,
want to cut you here. I think what would
yes.
be important to remember is that there are layers of audiences. So there's just not one kind of audience in Pakistan. So I think the people who are going to the literature festival are a little more exposed and have read more, and they can, be a little analytical. You have a wide range of people coming there, but by and large, there are people who want to analyze things. And then you have something like Etrugul, which appeals to a mass audience.
Mhm.
So,
Yes, I mean, if it is creating interest in history and Ottoman culture, that's a good thing. But Ottoman culture is so delicate, you cannot just make a superficial TV show about this. And that's the problem with nationalism. You know,
right.
the nationalists today and in the past know so little about history. They see it as a war between good and evil, black and white. But when you look at Ottoman poetry, when you look at its layers, when you look at the epics, uh, there is um, there's an epic about an harp. There's a whole epic devoted to a harp, and it's so metaphorical.
I
And
think
there are
also
all
this
these
is a good
wonderful
time.
allegories.
It's a good time to explain the metaphor of your book, The Lion and the Nightingale. Now, I think it will connect up with what you're
Yes. Yes, so reading Ottoman divan poetry, and you'll find these great studies in English again, uh, and that has that is also interesting because most of the scholars of Ottoman poetry had to go to the U.S. because they were discriminated against in Turkey because in the 1950s Ottoman poetry was something like below us, something that is past its expiration date. So
saying.
Americans were clever to hire all these scholars, and they created these wonderful translations. And we learned that uh, the Ottoman poetry, in divan poetry, we have these wonderful metaphors. We have the nightingale, which is, um, the prophet and the beauty of the prophet, the beautiful voice of the prophet, and these Ottoman poets in gardens trying to capture the beauty. But of course, you cannot describe the prophet as a person. You cannot do
No.
figurative art. So you need these metaphors, and then there are these incredible and elaborate scenes of garden poetry. And
Mhm.
uh, the beauty of it is that you have to give so much to understand it. It's almost like understanding a T.S. Eliot poem or a James Joyce novel. And the effort pays off because you understand so much
Mhm.
about uh, why that poetry was necessary and why it was produced and under
Mhm.
which conditions it was produced. And then you understand the Ottoman society. You understand the importance of gardens, that there were these little patrons who were surrounded by poets who were producing art, and the artists were presented to the sultan, and if the sultan gave the green light, that's a poet would lead a great life and would be very productive. But if there was a political problem, uh, the poet could be skinned alive. They could also meet a very violent end. So all these things, I think there's so much material there, and I noticed that it's just in the libraries, just like what I was saying about the Turkish curfews.
Right.
It's all there, it's all written, we just don't look at it. We prefer to I mean, maybe I'm sounding like a grandfather who's complaining about everything, but when we watch too much, when you consume too much TV, when you stream too much of these series, maybe you are missing out on time which you can spend on reading these books and these histories. And
Yeah.
so as writers, our responsibility is to show the way. You know, here is the book that you should read. Here's a list, 10 books. Like, you go and read them because they are there.
So, in your book, you've also talked about how in modern Turkey, um, sort of artistic figures have become in several, in many ways marginal, and the clash between the lions and the nightingales. Who are the lions in modern Turkey, and who would you classify as the nightingales?
So my book begins in the aftermath of the military coup, and as I say in the book, I I felt safe because of the lions, because of the way that the Turkish President Erdogan and his supporters and people who don't like military coups from the left, from the right, everyone on the streets defending democracy. And you have to do some posturing, because there are tanks on the street. You cannot write poetry about the coup, and you cannot oppose it that way. So people were in the street opposing the coup, and so that kind of power structure and the trauma of it, uh, sadly afterwards, uh, turned into something of a power politics. So now in Turkey, power is admired and it's put on a pedestal. If you don't have power, you have nothing. And so what do? You have to be part of the power. You have to be part of the line. And uh, of course, we as artists, we want to be powerful in the sense that we want to be productive, we want to flourish artistically. But it became impossible if you don't have any links to the line. So as Nightingales, the problem we face is a crisis of independence. Can we be independent of the government and still flourish in Turkey? And I thought in the book, my analysis led me to think that it's become almost impossible because before the coup in 2010, in the year 2010, Istanbul was the cultural capital of Europe, European cultural capital. And I will never forget the sight of John Zorn, a progressive musician from New York, performing in Istanbul, in Haliç, because the central government was investing in art and investing in good art, in progressive and radical art, and all the artists were coming to Istanbul. But now, sadly, there's an exodus. Firstly, everyone is afraid. If you are too vocal about politics, if you say there is no freedom of expression in Turkey, people will come after you, and you may lose your job. And uh, my friends who are uh, in public sector and in private sector, they're increasingly facing a moral conundrum.
Right.
How should we act? We want to survive, and now the COVID crisis has led us to survival mode. Uh, and but can we survive without the morals? Can we survive in a way that we give up our values, that we give up our ideals? And the line is always there. It says, give up what you're doing, give up being a writer, uh, come and be a script writer for this public channel, or for this politician, or for this government owned newspaper. But you want to be independent because otherwise you can't tell the truth. So we are always having this moral choice, and it's a bit like the final years of communism in Poland, and that's why there's so much interest in the cinema of Kieślowski, for example. The individuals having these moral conundrums. We want to do the right thing. So lots of my friends have to be silent. They're muted because they have to preserve their job. But when preserving your job becomes your goal in life, you start to act not in a moral way. And so that's a dilemma that we are facing very strongly after the coup. And after the coup, instead of democratic reconciliation, what we've seen is a single party state where the power is centralized and the lions are ruling the country with an iron fist. So that's very sad because as historians of Ottoman culture, as intellectuals who thought that looking at Islamic culture was the most important thing we should do now, um, those people are losing their jobs. You know, an university called the Shair University was closed by the government, by a government decree, just because the president doesn't like it's the people who run that university. So all these great scholars of Islamic culture, Ottoman culture, found themselves without a job. And what
So
do they do?
gone. What are they doing now?
So that they are facing a moral choice. You know, they can say, okay, you closed our university, but we'll be silent about it and we'll act as if nothing happened. And so increasingly what we see is this demand to act as if nothing is happening. And people who can act as if nothing is happening can flourish, but people who say that something bad has happened, they face a problem. So we are facing this moral problem now, and this is creating the artistic material for the next decade, for novelists, for filmmakers. Maybe we'll see it in the films of Nuri Bilge Ceylan. We'll see it in the novels of Orhan Pamuk, because this is a historic moment where so much is happening, and the demand to be muted is so strong.
So what about the younger generation? I mean, even younger than you. Like, how do they sort of manage this culture of dissent? Do they understand the meaning of dissent, like you do,
Yes,
and how strongly you feel for it?
yes, I think there's great discussions about the Z generation and the Generation Z and their voting preferences. And you know, they elected an opposition mayor last year, uh, an opposition mayor who comes from the secularist party, but who can recite the Quran and who did the broadcast his recital of the Quran with an iPhone. So that is interesting. You know, people. I think the young people, the very young people, don't want to be lectured at all, and they want to see flexible people. You know, um, as a very young person, I never liked people who lectured me about secularism. You know, secularism is so important, this and that. You know, we thought you're so old fashioned. You know, because um, we have a great religious tradition here. How can you just wipe it out like that? You know, it doesn't make sense. And I think the young generation also look at the government and say, "No, but you close Wikipedia for how many years? For 2 years. It doesn't make sense. You know, we don't buy your arguments for censorship." And I think that the more the government is trying to, you know, pull Turkey out of the Istanbul Convention, where that protects the rights of women, and the more they attacked LGBTI people, you know, and act as if that thing doesn't happen, that exist. You know, they want us to say there is nothing like LGBTI people. There is nothing like censorship in this country. And of course, young people are always truth tellers. You know, you look at a 10-year-old and he'll come to me and say, "Okaya, your hair is so stupid. Why do you do it?" You know, they don't fear any kind of um, response. So they're very direct. And when you look at the election results last year, only I think 3 people voted for Erdogan's choice of mayor for Istanbul. 7 um, people from the Z generation, they voted for the opposition candidate. And so politicians are having a difficult time to capture the imagination of this young generation. And, you know, if you show them Ertugrul, maybe an 18-year-old would say, "Oh, but I prefer sex education, you know, something more about my life." Okay, of course, history is important. I'll read that in the future, but tell me something about sexuality, about my financial well-being, about the bullying at school. You give me some micro history, and just stop giving me always about macro history, these big histories. I just want to see interest and concern for my own trouble. So what I think the young generation want is less centralization. They want decentralization and more interest in their own particular concerns.
So they are more globalized because these concerns are pretty global. And,
Yes,
teenage or 20-year-olds across the world have similar thinking. So wouldn't that take them away from their own culture?
yes. So not their own culture, but from their ideology, because Turkish government is very ideological, and this
Mhm.
government 15 years ago, when they ascended to power, they came there because they were not ideological, because they were practical, they were flexible. But now they're very ideological. But as you say, there's a global interest uh, in looking at the particularities of individualism. And if there's a politician who says, I want to defend that university department that looked at Ottoman history because it's an important thing to preserve rather than close it, I think the young people would vote for that politician rather than the politician who says, no, we're just going to close it with my signature. That's not an attitude that young people like. Young people like to discuss. And of course, as you point out, the problem is what happens if they're alienated from Turkish culture because of this ideologicalization of the government. And that's, I think, where the intellectuals have a responsibility. They should say, uh, these politicians say they're conservative, they know about history, but they don't. But you can learn about history, and you should learn about history despite their posturing and ideological, shouting from the podium. Because never turn your back to this history, to this culture, and never become alienated from it because of the politicians. Because I think lots of people in Muslim majority countries make the mistake of turning their back to their histories and cultures because of politicians who use them for their own good. Because this culture and history is our material, it's our wealth. This is where we'll take inspiration from. This is where we'll write our books with. That's where we'll do an installation on. So
Right.
uh, we have to be careful and vigilant not to confuse the politicians with the culture and history that they claim they represent.
So, who are the people who watch this right wing nationalist um, media? I mean, like, who are the people who watch Turkish Disease like Ertugrul?
I don't think it's about being left wing or right wing. First of all, these are big productions, great productions, lavish productions, and you also, I think, want to go back to history. You want to go and see a reconstruction of an Ottoman street, an Ottoman tent, an Ottoman way of living, because maybe the present one you don't like that much. Maybe the politicians think that people like these series because after watching them, they're going to support the government. But maybe they'll say, you know what, on the Ottoman times, they did things much more cleverly. For me, 19th century Istanbul is a kind of paradise, because you look at the multiplicity of languages and cultures in Istanbul. That's a kind of ideal metropolitan world
That's
uh, that existed in Istanbul. It wasn't a centralized world. It was a decentralized world where all these different political and religious groups could be expressing themselves freely. So when you do take Ottoman history as an ideological tool, there's always the problem that it can misfire, because Ottoman history, you can look at it from a nationalist perspective, but if you look at it from the perspective of the most respected Ottoman historians, you see that it's not uh, a culture of nationalism. It's not a culture of binary, let's say, sexuality. In Ottoman culture, they don't have those binaries that
Right.
nationalists are now using to bash the LGBTI community. So, I mean, Ottoman history can be dangerous. If young people learn how Ottoman culture was structured, it can misfire. So you have to handle it carefully. And I think that the interest in these Ottoman shows is healthy, uh, to the point that they lead to more books and to reading.
Right. But they also sort of promote the strong man, authoritarian figure, culture, the lion that you talk about, don't they? I mean, this kind of um, ideal figure that they've created.
Yes, I mean, as long as the lion and the nightingale can coexist, there's no
Yeah.
problem. But if the nightingale is called a traitor, someone who stabs the nation in the back, then there's a problem, because if you alienate the intellectuals, they'll start an exodus. They'll just go all over Europe to the U.S. And in the history books, you won't have a good paragraph. So the lions have to be careful, because they may have all the power now, but the history is written by the nightingales. So the problem is, uh, how can they coexist? I think 10 years ago they coexisted in Istanbul. I mean, from my experience, there was a nice balance, and that balance can uh, exist again. It's not all lost, because we have witnessed how uh, there was a more uh, harmony between the power and the art world. And maybe in the 19th century, in late 19th century, maybe there was a similar balance that inspired people from the early republic to create these structures. So we have to learn from history. We have to learn. We have to look at the coup years. 1980s. A military general was running the country, and yet these artists, writers, they form their collectives. And maybe there's a we have the instinct of survival. We were talking about the COVID and the instinct of survival for the artistic world, but there's also an instinct to collaborate, to work together. You look at the military coup of 1980 and how the artistic world reacted to it. They learned how to stand by for each other, how to defend each other, how to form these little publishing houses, these little galleries, these little happenings in Istanbul, so that they could exist together, they could financially sustain their lives. Maybe some people had to work as in advertising agencies, maybe work in places that they didn't much enjoy, but then they could use that money to support the artistic community. So we
Right.
have to learn how to support each other, so that we can be independent and still flourish. So we have to learn, I think, from the 1980s what those people have experienced, and I think they learned something uh, from the previous generation. So that there's always, for the nightingales, there's always the possibility of learning, because we have a long memory.
So by and large, you're optimistic.
Yes, the I have the optimism uh, of the mind.
So in 2020 now, and nearly end of 2020, how would you define the religious secular balance in modern day Turkey, conservative versus modern?
So Turkey suffered a trauma a secular trauma, I think, in early 20th century, when the Islamic culture that constituted its soul was taken away with a signature on a decree, very violently, just like that. And for years, people started looking for that soul again, because uh, culture in Istanbul was based on little religious networks, tarikats, these little religious communities. And when you ban religion, when you say you have to think like a Frenchman, people said, okay, I just don't kill me. And then they went underground. This is how people react. They want to survive. But then you cannot take away the soul. So all these tarikats went underground. And I think that after a while, with the rise of the religious politics, they wanted to take a revenge. So when Hagia Sophia was remosqued
Right.
this summer, it was again with a signature on a decree, almost a perfect mirror image of the way it was de-sanctified. So it was re-sanctified with a signature. But of course, the problem is no one is discussing how we should do it. There is no democratic discussion. Secularism came to Turkey undemocratically, and now the desecularization is happening undemocratically. So I think Turkey has enough room for religious communities. I'm always on YouTube watching religious rituals in different parts of Turkey. It's fascinating. Um, there is also enough room.
When you talk about tariqat, you mean Sufi orders, different Sufi orders?
Yes,
And what?
Sufi orders,
Yeah.
and some orders more influenced uh, by Persian culture, because you look at Anatolia, it's not just one culture, and so uh, you see these, and you understand that religion absolutely should have a great place in Turkish public life. But then again, it cannot be with a vengeance. You cannot use religion as a way to slap people on the face, the kind of Ottoman slap. You have to understand that just like Ottoman history, epics, poetry, as what we were talking 10 minutes ago, it's very delicate. The Sufi tradition is based on the individual and the way the individual trains herself to be one uh, with the world. This is a very personal experience, and you cannot do it by politics. You cannot teach it from the podium. It has to be, you have to lock yourself in a cell and you have to transform yourself. It's very personal. So the politics cannot be an instigator for it. So I think that uh, Turkey needs to learn that religion um, as religion made a comeback to Turkish public life, it it should remain personal. It shouldn't be uh, people shouldn't propagate it from the podiums. It should stay as a personal endeavor, and in that sense, Turkey should stay secular. And only if Turkey stays secular can these religious cultures flourish, because otherwise, one religious movement can come and wipe away the other ones. So we have to be very vigilant in defending secularism.
So that's what you think can tip the balance if another movement comes in. I mean, if there's no balance amongst all these various religious movements in Turkey.
Yes. Uh, what we need is uh, a political system where religion is not a leading. I'm sorry. So what we need is a political system where uh, religion is not a preference. When you're looking at the politicians, and politicians are saying, this party is a party of the Christians. They are secret Christians. This party is an Armenian party. This party is the Kurdish party. And when it comes to that, it becomes very brutal. And Turkey has become very majoritarian. And the Muslims can say, "Oh, we are the majority here. We can do whatever we like." And if it comes to that, then Turkey doesn't have a democracy. What Turkey needs is a politics that doesn't use the language of religion, that respects to the utmost degree the freedom of these tarikats. I have no problem with religious sheikhs having conversations with their communities, with these religious training, with these religious culture flourishing. I have no problem with that. But if it comes to the political language has to be rational. It has to be free from these religious concepts like jihad and all these concepts that the Turkish government is now using. This is no place. You just keep them for your personal relations. Don't use them from the podiums. What we need is a rationalization of Turkish politics, and the politicians can do it. They're just too lazy. They just want to move the crowds with empty words. It's very cheap to attack the LGBTI people and accuse them of being pedophiles. And now they want the return of the capital punishment. It's very easy to move people with things like that, but you have to think of the effect. When you say the LGBTI people, they're raping our young children, that sentence has an effect. Someone is punched on the street in Istanbul, and when you want to bring back the capital punishment, it's very dangerous. What we suffered in our history was the executions of politicians and also student leaders. These are traumas for the Turkish nation, and you cannot just bring it back for 3% more votes in the 2023 elections. You just can't do that. It's unethical. But yet the politicians move like elephants. They just don't care. They just say, okay, we're going to bring back the capital punishment, and someone can remove it again. And just like they removed the parliamentary democracy, Turkey had a 2 centuries long struggle for parliamentary democracy. And just in the last 3 years, it has been just deleted. Why? Because they think it's more efficient. These things have,
They held a referendum to decide
yes,
that.
yes, a referendum. And now if there's another referendum, I think it will be the other way, because people don't like the democracy dismantled this way. So we learn from experience, from bad experiences, and we have to learn from our experiences. And so the only way to do it is through books. And so as writers, our mission is to record what is going on and what the dismantling of democracy means for people living today. And so maybe 20 years from now, someone will read and say, oh, in 2016, Turkish democracy just collapsed and these things happened. And this is how people reacted to it. Because in my book, Lion and the Nightingale, I describe how the artistic world, poets, curators, filmmakers have reacted to the clampdown. And they've, I think, reacted very creatively. And I think they are leaving examples to the future generation to endure similar crises.
So, what are you working on next, Kaya?
I'm now working on a book about an Armenian uh, an Armenian painter who operated in Istanbul and who was so fascinated by the Islamic art that he converted to Islam. But he could not be accepted to this closed shop of Ottoman painters, and he's an Armenian, and so I'm trying to find the life story of this person, and his experiences, and through his family, what happened to his family, and how did he fall in love with Islamic art, this Catholic Armenian, how he fell in love with it, and the role that the Armenians played in Ottoman culture in late 19th century and in early 20th century, and then how how Istanbul lost that wonderful community because of 1915. So it's about an Armenian trying to survive in a, I think, a similar situation that we are trying to survive now. It's a part fiction, part nonfiction. So I'm looking at my own situation. You know, I'm coming from a Muslim family. I'm an independent writer trying to survive in Istanbul, and I'm looking at this Armenian person trying to survive in Istanbul at a time again of political upheaval. And I think that maybe we'll find our soulmates, different soulmates in different centuries. If we look at history enough, we'll find people like us experiencing similar crises. But we have to look at history to understand that we are not singular. We are part of something bigger.
And that previous people sort of leave their, it kind of carries on maybe in our DNA or the DNA of the people what they went through, and may come up
Yes.
at any point in life through anybody.
Yes. I mean, we are just vessels. We are just carrying something to somewhere else. You know, if you think that you're an island, you know, you have a problem. If you just think that you're on your own, you don't get it. You have to understand that you're just a vessel. And that's why we have to learn Armenian, we have to learn Ottoman, we have to learn different languages, you know, because the Turkish nationalism that is imposed today by our politicians is very narrow. You know, you can't spend your life reading those government rags. You cannot spend your life reading these propaganda texts. You have to learn about your own history, and you have to learn another language because, you know, Ottoman Turkish, you have to learn it to read those texts. And so the great wealth is waiting for us there. And I think that if you write a book that is powerful enough, it will inspire in other people to learn about those eras, those historic eras. You have to give them the excitement and the curiosity to discover history.
And you've written a lot for the Western press out of Turkey, American and the UK. What are some of the sort of most outstanding questions you've got from your readers, or something that surprised you?
I mean, the main question is what is going on and how is it like in Istanbul right now? Just give us a street view perspective of what is happening. And then I like to give that, but then I like to take a bird's eye view. I want to look at history. I want to look at patterns. And I think that the first demand is to get an objective postcard of what's happening right now. That doesn't serve any political ends. That is very subjective, but also informed. And then from there, with your historical knowledge, you want to show them that this is not a special situation. This is part of a pattern in history. And then if you show that, then the present moment gathers a new meaning. So when I write for an American publication, the editors always look for the specific, and then they want to they want to see a retour to history. They want to see the historical perspective. And for readers, as I write in Line and the Nightingale, for some readers, Turkey is a touristic country. They come here for holidays. They
Yeah.
come just during summer, so they want to learn if it's safe. Is it safe to be there? Uh, some people care about freedom of expression. Some uh, maybe progressive-minded tourists wouldn't come to Turkey because of the political situation. Some others would just ignore it. So you encounter these situations, and the beauty of these situations is that they have memories of Istanbul. When I was touring England for my book, I saw many people, many British people, who have summer houses in Turkey and who are concerned for Turkey, for its safety, because they like to spend 3 months every year in Turkey. So Turkey becomes our common concern and something uh, that we physically experience. So that physical experience aspect is very important. It's not just a subject that people discuss in a Washington think tank. It's something that we experience personally. So when I look at it, I have to give my subjective point of view before historicizing it and show that I serve no political end. So that's the demand of the reader and the editor.
Kaya, thank you so much. There's so much we need to know about Turkey, and I mean, so much I want to know, and your book has been fabulous. And I'm going to read your previous book as well. And I think for all our followers at LLF and people who love to read, it's very illuminating. And we look forward to seeing you at the next LLF. I hope that happens soon. And
Inshallah.
COVID is a thing of the past.
Yes,
So
hopefully. Thanks very much for this wonderful conversation. And I look forward to talking to you again. And thanks to everyone who's been listening.
thank you so much, Kaya, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.